In the world of fantasy, you often see the great stories and epics being spearheaded by the noblest of leaders, the chosen princes, and the overly lit up kingdoms they fight for or defend their lives with. But before these tropes were typecast, things were a bit more raw. Yeah, I mean bloody, barbaric, lustful, greedy, and so much more. With this, which is what today's video is all about, we're listing down 7 of our favorite but forgotten barbarian kings from fantasy. So, without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Here we go. Kull. To kick things off, we have Kull. Kull is a barbarian belonging to the great lost land Atlantis. Kull's path to the throne had him take the crown of the ancient kingdom of Valusia, and he did so with his own hands and strength. As a result, he became a king who never really felt like a king, because while he did sit on a jeweled throne, his heart was always on the battlefield. Kull's rule was filled with obstacles, as he found himself constantly fighting against lies, secret plots, and the creeping feeling that civilization itself was nothing more than a beautiful trap. He tried being a fair ruler in a world that not only understood power and trickery, but every choice he made weighed on it. He wanted to do the right thing, but he was in a palace full of smiling enemies. But calling him a copy of Conan is something I wouldn't take lightly. In fact, I will counter that by saying Kull as a character feels more like Conan's spiritual ancestor. You see, they share the same muscle, bravery, and courage. But here's the difference. On one hand, you have Conan, who enjoys life and takes his throne as a prize. And on the other, there's Kull, who suffers from his own deep thoughts. He's a heavyweight warrior who thinks too much. Even his strange and often dark stories are reflective of that, as they are filled with grotesque visuals like shape-shifting serpent men who wear the faces of friends, or something like the horror of achieving ultimate power and how lonely even that can be. Conan the Barbarian is someone who wants to be king, whereas Kull the Conqueror becomes a king but finds it as a prison. This makes Kull a tragic figure, since he is the barbarian who wins everything but ends up realizing that he wanted none of it. So why was an interesting character like Kull forgotten? It's because his student shadowed the teacher. Yeah, Conan the Barbarian became a giant in books, comics, and movies as compared to the more serious and thoughtful stories of Kull, which did not capture the public's imagination in the same wild way. His only major movie came out decades later and did not become an instant classic. But that doesn't change the fact that Kull is the brilliant protagonist that history left behind, simply because, as a king, he asked, why? Brak. Next we have Brak. Here comes a giant of a man with yellow braids and a heavy broadsword, who casts out from his frozen homeland. His people threw him out for asking questions about their cruel gods. His only dream was to travel south to a golden city of legend called Kurdistan. He did not want or intend to leave. He just wanted to arrive. But in his journey, there seemed to be danger, always looming around the corner. There were literal monsters, evil sorcerers, and demon cults who stood in his way. Time and again, Brak would survive a horrible disaster, and simply because he was the last one standing, people would turn to him to provide them hope, and as a result, lead him. As things turned out, his rule was always an accident. It felt like a burden placed on him purely due to his sheer endurance. But what makes Brak special is the unexpected soul he finds in his journey. His whole world is a fantasy land, but in it, he meets religions that feel very much like Christianity. He talks with friars who seem to follow a nameless god marked by a cross. In one famous scene, a beautiful witch shows him all the kingdoms of the world and offers them to him if he will give up his soul. This is a direct retelling of the devil tempting Jesus in the Bible. But this spiritual layer gives a unique depth to Brak's character and the kind of adventures he finds himself in. Unknowingly, he's seen quite often fighting on the side of good. But Brak faded from memory mainly because of a similar reason to Kull. Even he walked in the very long shadow of Conan's. While his books were fun and filled with classic pulp adventures, they came after Conan did, and were just seen as part of a crowd. Another reason is that the collections of his stories were published in a very confusing order, which also made it difficult for new readers to follow his lore. All in all, he's a perfect example of a wanderer who often found himself filling heroic shoes, which made him earn his crown, much to his surprise. Brak is a king made by fate rather than by desire. Thongor. Our next barbarian makes us journey all the way to a forgotten, prehistoric continent of Lemuria. Allow me to introduce you to a warrior named Thongor. He is someone who rose from the icy wastes of Valkarth. Thongor donned his black hair, golden eyes, and obviously his immense strength. He lived a life of adventure as a thief, a pirate, and a mercenary. But his destiny was much bigger, because he would go on to become the savior of all Lemuria as he fought cataclysmic threats and ancient sorceries, which led him to finally become the emperor of the great city of Patanga. His rule was said to be the foundation of a new age of mankind. Thongor separates himself from other barbarian warriors purely due to the sheer scale of his battles. This is someone who fights against forces that are capable of, and quite literally do, pose a civilizational threat. He even fights forgotten technologies from dead races, along with dinosaurs and even gods of darkness. You can see that his stories are all about pushing humanity out of the way from a prehistory that he considers to be filled with savagery, and moving it towards the light of his empire. He is a barbarian who builds a kingdom from the ashes of a dying world, and this makes him less of a personal hero and more of a force of historical change. Now, the reason Thongor is not well known today is that he was a living tribute and not an original revolution. Yeah, you guessed it right. Yet again, there is Conan in the mix. The author behind Thongor and his adventures, Lynn Carter, created him in the 1960s to honor Robert E. Howard's Conan. Yes, the adventures are exciting and full of color, but they often feel like a passionate fan's version of the real thing. Thongor never got a major movie or a comic series, but what he did become is a cherished hero for many sword and sorcery fans, as someone to have been destined to be a myth in the making. Imaro. Our next entrant in this list is the great Imaro. He was born to a fierce warrior tribe of the Numbani Plains called Iyasai in fantasy Africa. Imaro was hated from birth and was someone who lived his life with a great deal of struggle and pain. His mother arrived pregnant and claimed he had no father. Then, he was called the son of no one and was bullied mercilessly because of it. Even after proving himself to be a mighty warrior, he suffered as he faced betrayal. After having had enough of these adversities, he decided to leave. Later on, his life became a long quest as he looked for a place to belong. But as years passed by, his might and his courage led him to performing various heroic acts and protecting a great number of lives. As a result, he became a legendary leader of the outcasts, the bandits, and fellow exiles, among whom he seems to have found his own family. Imaro is such a fascinating character study, because here we have someone who is truly a fitting answer to the old racist jungle stories of the past. The character was created by Charles Saunders, where Imaro's world is built on real African cultures, landscapes, and histories. Saunders constructed him as someone complex and emotional, since he's seen battling his loneliness while still longing for acceptance. Along with that, Imaro possesses incredible strength in combat, and this more or less feels like a product of his emotional pain. We see him cry and even feel his isolation, which also makes him so human. He's a barbarian king whose greatest battle is for his own identity and heart. But Imaro's fade from the mainstream is a result of unfair social barriers. As a black hero in a genre that was overwhelmed by the representation of white characters, he struggled for attention from major publishers and marketers. Despite his stories being some of the best and most important sword and sorcery ever written, his books became hard to find. Imaro is an essential character for the grander scheme of things, in spite of being a forgotten king, which was mainly due to the industry that was complicit in overlooking outspoken and diverse voices like Charles Saunders and black heroes like Imaro. Kane. Now, take a breath before we move ahead. In fact, you need to take a seat to just listen and bear the wrath of this next name, because he is none other than Kane. Kane is what happens when you personify a literal curse. Ages ago, he killed his own brother and was punished by a god to walk the earth forever. He is this giant who has red hair and chilling blue eyes. Kane is a master of the sword as well as the blackest sorcery. Over the course of thousands of years, he has been a warlord, a conqueror, and a ruler of fallen empires. But there's no room for joy, justice, and seemingly an end to his rule. It feels like a cycle of gaining power through brutality, then him growing bored with it and eventually watching his kingdoms crumble to dust. To put it simply, Kane is a great antithesis of Conan as a character in a lot more ways than you realize. Even with his beginnings, when he was created by Karl Edward Wagner, Kane was intended to bring some elements of classic gothic horror with his stories. Now, Kane is super intelligent and cynical, and the latter makes sense for him to be utterly without morals. Why would an immortal care for what is right and wrong for mere mortals? He even uses magic freely, unlike Conan, who hates it. Kane's stories are slow and bleak, with sword fights and a constant element of fear being prominent factors in the stories. At times, you might even feel this nihilism from Kane's belief, because this character has been clear about how little he really values temporary victories and leading kingdoms when it comes to truly fulfilling his desires, which those things don't seem to do. As a character, Kane remains a forgotten king, because his darkness is not everyone's cup of tea. He seemingly offers no heroics, no happy endings, and no simple adventures. His tales are examples of some stoic philosophy fused with violence, where the protagonist, Kane himself, is leading those very central themes at the core of the story. Jirel. Transporting you to a rather fantastical yet haunted version of medieval France, we arrive at a place called Joiry. This place was ruled by a tall, strong, and beautiful lady who had her pride as fierce as her sword arm. I'm talking about Jirel. And this warrior was a ruler who defended herself against absolute nightmares. Her enemies were literal creatures from hellish dimensions, like shadowy beings and wizards filled with pure evil. It was her rule that maintained a never-say-die will in the kingdom and a temper that was so fiery it could scare the devil himself. But Jirel as a character made history. She was created by C.L. Moore in the 1930s and was one of the very first women to star in her own sword and sorcery stories. Instead of having her written as just another princess who would simply be waiting for her knight in shining armor to come rescue her, we saw a brilliant shift from conservative tropes where she was made to be the rescuer herself. And trust me, she was often brutal in her ways. To save her people, she would willingly march into alien worlds and fight absurd entities that were totally inexplicable at times. And her bravery is what the main takeaway was from the story, as a woman holding her ground, stamping her authority, and proving her defiance against cosmic levels of horror. Sadly, Jirel's tales saw a fade in popularity over time, but that's purely due to getting overshadowed. In the pulp magazines of her time, the bigger stars were male heroes like Conan and Solomon Kane. Jirel even had fewer stories, and even those were unfairly deemed to be unusual for the masses' tastes. Regardless, for those who've been a fan of her stories, they know her as an inspiring warrior with a spirit that refuses to bow down. Conan. On to the final name on our list, and it's only right that we've saved the best for last. I know Conan is not forgotten at all. However, him as a king? I am not sure how many of us remember that happening. His legacy has been mentioned numerous times in this video itself. This young mercenary who became a pirate and a rebel is now the seasoned king of Aquilonia, the mightiest nation in the world. He took the crown by killing the corrupt old king with his bare hands. Now, he must keep it. His rule had him fight off all sorts of invasions, root out spies, and outmaneuver different sorcerers, as he did with his old enemy, Thongor. He also tries to be a good father, who is seen teaching his son Khan how to be a good ruler and a good man. But the King Conan version of his character is the one that truly completes him, even while separating him from his own legend. Pop culture remembers the young, shirtless warrior, but King Conan shows the full journey. The throne is the hardest challenge he's ever faced, and he must use his brain as much as his brawn. As a result, he learns diplomacy, feels the weight of every decision, and protects an entire nation. It's a story about responsibility, legacy, and the price of power. This chapter of Conan is a truly civilized barbarian who has not lost his edge at all, and only gone on to sharpen his mind. To conclude, while Conan himself is immortal as a character, this final chapter of his life is often overlooked, even among the fans. The image of Conan as a wise king is less flashy than the image of a younger him fighting a giant snake. But it is this chapter that makes him a true king, and someone more than just a conquering barbarian. Conan, as the king of Aquilonia, shows us that ruling in peace is the ultimate test to overcome for a lifelong man of war. And that's our video for today. We hope you had a great time as I listed down my personal favorite barbarian kings who have seen an unfortunate fade in their popularity. But these are names that I strongly believe modern fantasy still takes inspiration from. So, while their names might get overlooked, their legacies and their great lore speak for themselves. These were kings who lived amidst all of the chaos around them, yet managed to leverage that into carving their own crown. Now, as always, please like this video, share it with your friends, and let us know your favorite barbarian king in the comments section down below. Finally, please hit that subscribe button, and until next time, take care and ciao!